The rugged coasts of ancient Britain are shrouded in mist and memory. Across this landscape of warring kingdoms and whispered legends, we assume kings held all the power. But what if that is not the whole story? A profound historical mystery waits just beneath the surface. I want to introduce you to the forgotten queens of the Celtic Fringe. These were formidable women who ruled, led armies, and shaped the destiny of nations, only to be systematically erased from history. By the end of this, you will know the true stories of these erased rulers and understand the forces that tried to silence them. We will uncover why a pragmatic queen chose peace over rebellion, and how a tragic Irish queen's marriages ignited a war that changed everything. What does it mean for a powerful woman to be forgotten by time? These Celtic lands were a world apart, clinging to their ancient traditions long after Roman legions had withdrawn from Britain. In places like Ireland, Wales, and the Scottish Highlands, society was built not around cities but around powerful, interconnected families. Their power was measured in cattle, loyalty, and the sharpness of their swords. And at the very top of this warrior aristocracy sat the queen, but her title meant something far more potent than we might assume today. A Celtic queen was often a sovereign ruler in her own right. She could inherit land, lead her own war band into battle, and act as a supreme judge in legal disputes. Her power was personal, direct, and recognized by law. She was a political leader, a military commander, and a key religious figure, presiding over the sacred ceremonies that bound her people to the land and the gods. This starkly contrasts with the later medieval ideal of a queen as merely a king's consort, a vessel for producing heirs. Yet this powerful reality is obscured by a deep fog of myth. Our sources are a tangled mix of cryptic inscriptions on weathered stone, chronicles written centuries later by monks with their own biases, and epic tales where history and legend are inseparable. In these stories, we meet queen goddesses like the Morrigan, a terrifying figure of war and fate, or Medebe of Connacht, whose relentless ambition sparks a great cattle raid. But were these legendary women echoes of real, formidable rulers or purely divine inventions? This is the core of the mystery. The historical queens and the mythical goddesses are so intertwined that pulling their threads apart becomes a monumental task. The very records that preserve their memory also distort it, leaving us to wonder where the woman ends and the legend begins. So why were these powerful voices silenced? The answer lies in a centuries-long campaign of historical erasure. Later medieval chroniclers, almost exclusively men living in monasteries, held the pen that recorded history. Their worldview often could not comprehend or actively sought to diminish the idea of a woman wielding sovereign power. A queen leading an army was not celebrated. It was an anomaly to be explained away or a transgression to be condemned. Their accounts systematically reshaped the past to fit a new, more patriarchal mold. Then came the seismic shock of the Norman conquest. These invaders brought with them a rigid feudal system where power flowed down from a king through his loyal male vassals. In this new order, land was owned by men and inherited by men. The older Celtic model, where a woman could be a landholding ruler in her own right, was actively suppressed and legally dismantled. The very framework that had supported queenship was broken. Centuries later, the Victorian era added another layer of obscurity. Romantic novelists and painters rediscovered the Celtic past, but they recast its women as passive, tragic beauties or ethereal fairy queens. They were stripped of their political agency and military might, transformed into figures of legend who wept and waited but never ruled. This was a history made palatable for a different time, but it was a profound distortion. Uncovering the truth, then, is a form of detective work. We must become textual archaeologists, sifting through layers of bias. The clues are scattered. A single line in a monastic chronicle might grudgingly mention a queen's victory in battle. Ancient law tracts preserved through generations detail the rights and responsibilities she legally held. Fragments of poetry once sung in royal halls preserve her name and her deeds, and archaeology provides the physical proof from the grandeur of her fort to the personal objects buried with her. Each piece is a whisper from the past, challenging the official story. Her name echoes through time as a firebrand, a queen who defied an empire. Boudica of the Iceni stands as the ultimate archetype of the forgotten Celtic queen, a figure so immense she nearly broke free from the erasure that consumed others. Her story begins not with a crown but with a profound betrayal. When her husband, King Prasutagus, died, he left his kingdom jointly to his daughters and the Roman emperor, a strategic move to secure his family's future. Rome's response was brutal. The Roman army descended, flogged Boudica, assaulted her daughters, and seized the lands of the entire Iceni nobility. This was not just a political annexation, it was a calculated act of humiliation designed to shatter a culture. And it sparked one of the most ferocious rebellions in the history of Roman Britain. Boudica united the shattered tribes, leading a vast army in a vengeful campaign that swept across the province. They razed 3 major Roman settlements to the ground, including Londinium, leaving a scorched earth trail of ash and bone. The archaeological record screams this truth. In London, archaeologists find a distinct, thick red layer of burned debris buried deep under the modern city, a permanent scar in the earth they call the Boudican destruction layer. It is physical proof of her fury, yet her triumph was tragically short. The disciplined Roman legions eventually regrouped and met her forces in a final, cataclysmic battle. Though the exact location is lost, the outcome is clear. Boudica's army was annihilated and she herself died, likely by poison to avoid capture. Rome had won, and it seemed her story would end there, another erased rebel. But Boudica would not stay forgotten. Her memory was preserved in a twist of historical fate by the very people who defeated her. The Roman historians Tacitus and Cassius Dio recorded her rebellion, painting a vivid, if biased, portrait of the wild-haired warrior queen. They wrote her into history, ensuring her name would survive. Over the centuries, her legend transformed. During the Renaissance, she was rediscovered as a symbol of British resistance. For the Victorians, she became a national icon, immortalized in a grand bronze statue by the Thames, a figure of righteous fury. But this popular image often sanded away her true Celtic identity, recasting her as a proto-British patriot. More importantly, her spectral presence haunted the medieval world long after Rome fell. Her story, passed down through generations, became a powerful secret history for the queens who came after her. In the courts of later Welsh and Scottish rulers, the tale of a queen who could muster armies and challenge a superpower served as a potent inspiration. She was the ghost in the machine of Celtic queenship, a reminder that a woman could wield ultimate authority, even in the face of overwhelming force. Boudica's legacy is a paradox, a queen nearly erased by her enemies only to be resurrected by them, her fiery spirit refusing to be extinguished. She blazed a trail that others would try to walk, even as the world grew darker for women in power. While Boudica's rebellion burned white-hot, another queen chose a different path to power, one of cold, calculated survival. In the rugged hills of what is now northern England, Queen Cartimandua ruled the Brigantes, the largest tribe in Britain. Her story is the fascinating and often overlooked counterpoint to Boudica's fiery legend. Where Boudica fought, Cartimandua negotiated. Where Boudica sought to destroy Rome, Cartimandua decided to use it. She was a client queen, a formal ally of the empire, and her reign depended on a delicate balancing act between Roman demands and the pride of her own warrior nobility. This was not a story of glorious rebellion, but of pragmatic statecraft, and it has made her far less memorable, yet no less formidable. Her most controversial act perfectly illustrates this pragmatism. A charismatic war leader named Caratacus, the last great hope of the British resistance, was defeated in the south and fled north to seek sanctuary with the Brigantes. He arrived at Cartimandua's court expecting the hospitality due a fellow Celtic leader. Instead, Cartimandua had him arrested, put in chains, and handed over to the Romans. To her warrior aristocracy, this was a profound betrayal of sacred custom. To Cartimandua, it was simple, brutal logic. Harboring Rome's most wanted enemy would have meant immediate invasion and the certain destruction of her kingdom. By surrendering one man, she secured peace for thousands. The Roman historian Tacitus, while scornful of her treachery, could not help but acknowledge its success. It was a move that secured Roman favor and stabilized her rule for years. Yet the greatest threat to her power would come not from Rome but from her own home. Her husband, King Venutius, was a man of the old ways, a champion of the anti-Roman faction within the tribe. For a time, their marriage was a political union that held these opposing forces together. But the alliance shattered. Cartimandua divorced him, and in a move that sent shockwaves through the region, she married his armor-bearer, a man named Vellocatus. In the honor-bound culture of the Brigantes, this was an unforgivable insult. It was not merely a personal scandal, it was a political earthquake. Venutius used the outrage to rally his supporters, plunging the tribe into a bitter civil war. Cartimandua's own political cunning had backfired, forcing her to call upon her Roman allies for a military rescue. The legions had to intervene to extract her from her own capital, a stark reminder that her power, however skillfully wielded, ultimately rested on the support of a distant emperor. So why has this masterful political survivor been overshadowed by Boudica? The answer lies in the stories we prefer to tell. Boudica's narrative is a simple, powerful epic of good versus evil, of righteous vengeance against an oppressor. It fits the classic mold of a tragic hero. Cartimandua's story is murkier, painted in shades of grey. She is the collaborator, the ruler who made a deal with the devil to stay in power. Her legacy is one of difficult, morally ambiguous choices, not glorious last stands. There are no grand statues of Cartimandua by the Thames. Her name does not stir the patriotic heart. She is a lesson in realpolitik, and realpolitik is rarely romantic. Yet her reign reveals a crucial truth about the Celtic world. There was not one single way to be a queen. While Boudica represents the path of defiant destruction, Cartimandua embodies the art of the possible, the difficult and often thankless work of preservation through compromise. Across the Irish Sea, the mists of the Celtic world clung to a different rugged coastline, where a single kingdom straddled the water itself. This was Dalriata, a realm born of the sea, its power stretching from the north of Ireland to the western shores of Scotland. More than just a kingdom, it was a crucible, a place where Gaelic language, law, and culture were forged into the very bedrock of what would become Scotland. Here, power was not solely a matter of land, but of ships and sea lanes connecting chieftains across a stormy frontier. And in this dynamic maritime society, the Queen held a title rich with authority, the Regain. Her power was not a borrowed light from her husband's throne. It was her own. A Regain's influence often flowed directly from her own royal bloodline, a lineage as prestigious and powerful as the king's own. She was a political player in her own right, a key piece in the great game of alliances that held the kingdom together. This independent source of authority meant she could act as a power broker, a stabilizer, and sometimes, as we will see, the very heart of resistance when her world began to fracture. Far to the north, beyond the reach of Rome and the Gaelic kings of Dalriata, a different kind of power was etched in stone. The Picts, the painted people, carved their history into the landscape itself, leaving behind a legacy of swirling symbols and stark monuments that have baffled scholars for centuries. Among the most tantalizing puzzles they left is the possibility that their kings did not inherit their thrones from their fathers, but from their mothers. This is the theory of Pictish matrilineal, a system where the royal bloodline flowed through the queen. If true, it would mean that Pictish women were not just influential, they were the very source of a king's right to rule. The evidence is fragmentary, written not in chronicles but in lists of kings. Several Pictish king lists recorded much later by outsiders show a curious pattern. Kings often seem to be succeeded not by their sons, but by their brothers, their nephews, or by men whose connection to the previous ruler is unclear. This strange succession suggests a system where a man became king because he was the son of a previous king's sister. His legitimacy came from his mother, the royal princess, ensuring the crown stayed within her direct bloodline. This was a brilliant, if complex, solution to the problem of succession. It prevented power from being locked into a single male line that could easily die out, and it made royal women the absolute keystones of political stability. A Pictish princess was not a prize to be won, she was the throne incarnate. Her marriage would have been the most sensitive political negotiation in the kingdom, and her sons would carry the future of the dynasty. Yet this theory is hotly debated. Some historians argue the evidence is too thin, that the king lists can be interpreted in other ways. They point out that we have no surviving Pictish law code that explicitly states this rule. The truth is, we are trying to reconstruct an entire political system from a handful of names and the silent testimony of stone, and those stones may be trying to tell us something. Scattered across Scotland, from simple undressed slabs to magnificent cross slabs covered in intricate carvings, are the Pictish symbol stones. They are covered in a mysterious vocabulary of symbols, a code we have yet to crack. There are beasts like the eagle and the fearsome Pictish beast, everyday objects like mirrors and combs, and abstract symbols like the double disc and Z-rod. Many believe these are statements of identity, of lineage, and of power. And crucially, several of these symbols are found in clusters that repeat, almost like a heraldic coat of arms. Could these recurring symbols represent powerful matrilineal dynasties? Could a specific combination of a serpent and a mirror signify the royal house a king belonged to through his mother? The mirror symbol, in particular, has long been associated with women, suggesting that these stones were not just monuments to male warriors, but chronicles of the female lines that gave them authority. Imagine the power a Pictish queen would have wielded in such a system. She was the living vessel of the kingdom's destiny. Her choices, her loyalties, and her very body were the foundation upon which kings were built. This was a form of influence so fundamental it was woven into the legal and spiritual fabric of society. While queens like Boudicca and Cartimandua had to seize or negotiate for their power, a Pictish queen's authority may have been an unquestioned fact of life, as immutable as the granite on which her people carved their history. The stones stand as silent witnesses, guarding the secrets of a world where power truly came from the mother. The power of a Celtic queen could transcend the throne, finding its ultimate expression not in a fortress but in a shrine. Across these lands, many formidable rulers were later venerated as saints, their political authority seamlessly transformed into lasting spiritual legacy. This was a profound final act of reinvention, where a queen's earthly influence was sanctified, ensuring her name would be spoken with reverence for centuries after her death. Consider Saint Modwenna, a figure shrouded in the mists of both Ireland and Scotland. Her legends describe her as a princess and an abbess, a leader who founded churches and ministered to communities. Buried within these pious tales are likely echoes of a real, powerful woman, a landholder and a patron whose leadership was so essential that her memory had to be preserved within the only framework that could guarantee its survival, the church. Her story, however mythologized, points to a world where a woman's command could extend over both souls and territory. Even beyond the strictly Celtic sphere, figures like Saint Ethelthryth, an Anglo-Saxon queen, demonstrate how this model of saintly queenship resonated across cultural boundaries. She famously founded the Great Abbey of Ely after leaving her royal marriage, choosing a life of spiritual devotion over secular power. Her cult became immensely popular, and her story would have been well known in Celtic regions, serving as a powerful example of a queen consciously exchanging one form of sovereignty for another. The key to understanding these saintly queens lies in their hagiographies, the idealized biographies of saints written after their deaths. To the modern eye, these texts can seem like pure fiction, filled with miraculous healings and divine interventions. But for the historian, they are a kind of palimpsest, a document where the original writing has been scraped away but faint traces remain. A story about a saintly queen calming a storm might be a metaphor for her ability to bring peace to a warring region. A tale of her feeding the poor from a single loaf of bread could be a distorted memory of her wise management of grain stores during a famine. The religious narrative acts as a veil, but beneath it, we can often glimpse the outline of a skilled administrator, a diplomat, or a benefactor. Why did this happen? Why were these queens recast as saints? The conversion to Christianity did not erase the deep-seated cultural need for powerful female figures. It simply provided a new language for that power. A queen who was once a priestess of the old gods could become an abbess, a direct conduit to the new Christian God. Her sacred authority remained, but its expression changed. By making a queen a saint, the Church co-opted her memory, but it also, perhaps unintentionally, preserved it. It was a compromise that allowed the legacy of these powerful women to endure in a world that was increasingly limiting their successors. The Saint Queen stands as a final, fascinating paradox, a ruler whose earthly power was so potent that it had to be cloaked in a heavenly mantle to be remembered at all. Gormlaith Ingen Merchata was a storm at the heart of Irish politics. Her life reads like an intricate web of alliances and betrayals, a testament to how a queen's personal choices could shake entire kingdoms. She was born into the powerful Wielded dynasty, daughter of a king of Leinster, sister to another, and her marriages wove her directly into the most explosive conflict of her age. She was wife, in turn, to three rival High Kings of Ireland, the most famous being Brian Boru himself. This was not a woman on the sidelines. She was a primary instrument of statecraft, her hand in marriage a strategic prize that could secure a fragile peace or inflame ancient hatreds. But Gormlaith was far more than a political pawn passed between powerful men. She was a force in her own right, her own ambitions and loyalties constantly shifting the balance of power. Her final marriage to Brian Boru was a grand attempt to unite the warring factions of Ireland, binding the southern Wielded to Boris' rising power from Munster. It was a political masterstroke that created a temporary, tense peace, but it was a peace built on a powder keg. When that marriage soured, her subsequent actions, including supporting her own brother and son in a revolt against Boru, helped set the stage for the cataclysmic Battle of Clontarf in 1014. This was not a simple domestic dispute. It was a queen's personal grievance erupting into a war that would define Ireland for centuries, a clear demonstration that the personal was profoundly political in the Celtic world. What makes Gormlaith truly unforgettable, however, is the voice that echoes down to us from the past. A handful of ancient poems are attributed to her, and they offer a breathtakingly rare glimpse into the inner world of a medieval woman. This is not the filtered, formal language of chronicles written by monks. This is raw, emotional, and deeply personal. In one lament, she speaks of her grief and her pride, of the king she loved and the betrayal she endured. She curses some and mourns others, her words filled with a stark awareness of her own role in the grand and tragic drama of her life. To hear this voice is to bridge 1,000 years in an instant. It shatters the silent, stoic image of the medieval queen and reveals a complex, passionate individual who experienced love, rage, and profound regret. Gormlaith's legacy is one of immense influence and profound tragedy. She wielded power through her lineage, her marriages, and her own formidable will, yet she ultimately outlived her husbands, her brother, and her son, dying in a loneliness her poems so poignantly capture. She embodies the ultimate price of political power for a Celtic queen, a reminder that in a world of warring kings, the woman who stood at the center of the storm could shape history yet still be consumed by it. Gormlaith's life was a high-stakes chess game played with kingdoms as pieces. Her first marriage tied her to the Norse king of Dublin, Olaf Cuaron, linking the powerful wielded dynasty to the wealthy Viking trading ports. This union brought Norse warriors and silver into Irish politics, but when Olaf died, the board was reset. Her next move was to marry Malachy, the High King, placing her at the very center of Irish power. Yet the most fateful alliance was her third, to Brian Boru, the ambitious king from Munster who challenged Malachy's throne. In marrying Brian, Gormlaith became the living bond between the two rival factions, a human peace treaty meant to end decades of war. For a time it worked. Brian became High King, and Ireland knew an unprecedented, if fragile, peace. But this web of alliances was spun from dynastic ambition, not affection, and it was destined to tear. The fracture began when Brian set aside Gormlaith, a public humiliation that struck at her status and her lineage's pride. It was then that the Queen's political instincts turned vengeful. She was the sister of the King of Leinster, and she reportedly urged her brother to rise up against Brian, her former husband. Even more dramatically, she supported her own son, Sitric Silkbeard, the Norse King of Dublin, in joining this rebellion. In one calculated series of moves, she had pitted her son, her brother, and the Norse forces of Dublin against the High King of Ireland, a man to whom she had once been wed. The question of her true loyalty is the great mystery of her life. Was she a master strategist playing a long game to restore her own native Leinster to supremacy? Or was she a pawn, her actions driven by personal slight and manipulated by the men around her? The truth likely lies in the terrifying autonomy she actually possessed. A queen of her birth could not be merely a passive token. Her bloodline gave her an independent power base, and her relationships were her weapons. By turning her influence against Brian, she demonstrated that a queen's alliance was the bedrock of power, and her enmity could be its downfall. The result was the Battle of Clontarf, a brutal, day-long slaughter on the coast near Dublin that saw Brian Boru killed, though his forces ultimately won. Gormlaith's machinations had lit the fuse for a conflict that decimated Ireland's old political order. She wielded the immense influence of a Celtic queen, but her story is a stark lesson in its precarious nature. She outlived nearly all the key players, a widow and a mother who had orchestrated a war that claimed her husband and shattered her world, leaving her with a legacy of immense power and profound, lonely consequence. While Gormlaith's power flowed from her bloodlines and marriages in the rugged hills of Wales, a queen's authority could be rooted in something even more concrete, the law itself. Here, the legal code known as the Laws of Wielded presented a vision of society radically different from the feudal systems emerging elsewhere. This was not a set of rules imposed from above, but a collection of native Welsh customs codified around the 10th century, traditions that remembered a time when women were not legal minors but independent actors. Under this framework, a Welsh woman's rights to property were extraordinary. When she married, she did not simply vanish into her husband's legal identity. She brought with her a share of family land called agwedi, which remained unequivocally hers. If the marriage ended, whether by death or divorce, she took that land back with her, along with a further share of the couple's acquired property. This meant a woman could be a propertied, wealthy individual in her own right, her economic independence legally guaranteed. Compare this to English common law, where the doctrine of coverture meant a wife's legal and economic identity was entirely subsumed by her husband's. In Wales, a woman was her own person before the law. Her autonomy extended into the most personal of realms. Divorce was permitted for a wide range of reasons, from simple mutual consent to a husband's impotence or his wife's unattended leprosy. If a woman found her marriage intolerable, she could leave and take her property with her, a right that gave her tremendous leverage and personal freedom. Even the concept of honor was quantified and protected. The law assigned a specific honor price to every individual, a monetary value placed on their personal standing. Insulting or assaulting a woman required paying compensation not just to her male relatives but to her directly. Her dignity had a legal worth, and she was the direct beneficiary of its protection. This robust legal framework created a social landscape where powerful women could truly flourish. A queen in Wales was not an anomaly, she was the system working as intended. Her power was not a fluke or a temporary regency, but a predictable outcome of a culture that legally endorsed female agency. She could inherit land, control wealth, and command loyalty based on her own legal standing, not merely as an extension of a king. The law was the foundation upon which her fortress was built. This distinct Welsh worldview, however, could not withstand the relentless pressure from its neighbor. The final act in the story of the Forgotten Queens would be a slow, legal strangulation, as one system of power deliberately set out to dismantle another. Her beauty was said to be so legendary it could start a war, and in the fractured world of 12th century Wales it did. Princess Nest Ferch Rhys was the daughter of the last king of Deheubarth, a woman whose life became a mirror of the violent struggle between Welsh tradition and Norman ambition. After her father's death, she was taken into the household of the Norman king Henry I, a common practice for the children of conquered rivals. She was raised in his court, a polished jewel in a foreign setting, but she was always a prize, a key to legitimacy in the volatile Welsh marches. Her first union was with Gerald of Windsor, a powerful Norman lord, a marriage designed to cement an alliance. But Nest was more than a political ornament. She was a survivor, navigating a world where her royal Welsh blood made her both coveted and dangerously exposed. The crisis that would define her legend erupted one night at Gerald's coastal stronghold of Cilgerran Castle. A Welsh prince, Owain ap Cadwgan, inflamed by tales of Nest's beauty, launched a daring raid. His men surrounded the wooden fortification, setting it ablaze. According to the chronicles, Gerald escaped through a privy shaft, but Owain seized Nest and her children, carrying them off into the darkened Welsh hills. This was not a simple romantic abduction. It was a profound political act, a direct challenge to Norman authority, and a bold reclaiming of a Welsh princess by a Welsh prince. The incident ignited a firestorm. King Henry was furious, and Gerald of Windsor raised his forces, plunging the region into a brutal war of retaliation aimed squarely at Owain and his family. Nest, the cause of it all, was now the center of a storm that pitted Welshmen against Welshmen and Welsh against Norman. Her story did not end with that dramatic capture. She was eventually returned, but her life continued to be a tapestry of strategic alliances. After Gerald's death, she married again, not once but twice, each time to a Norman sheriff or lord. With each union, she produced children who would inherit her legacy, weaving her royal bloodline into the very fabric of the new Anglo-Welsh aristocracy. Her descendants were a living bridge between two worlds. From her line sprang both great Welsh princes who carried the banner of independence and powerful Norman marcher lords who enforced the king's law. She was, in essence, a genealogical linchpin, her blood uniting the warring cultures of Wales for generations to come. Princess Nest's life forces us to ask a difficult question. Was she a pawn moved by the ambitions of powerful men, or was she a player using her unique position to secure her own survival and the future of her children? The truth likely lies in the terrifying, narrow space between those two ideas. She possessed a form of power rooted in her lineage and her famed beauty, but it was a power that made her a target, constantly forcing her to adapt and realign in a world where the ground was always shifting beneath her feet. She was the original Helen of Wales, a woman whose personal story became inseparable from the political destiny of her nation. Nest's true power did not fade with her lifetime, it multiplied through her children. From her union with Gerald of Windsor came a line that would become legendary, the Fitzgeralds. These sons and grandsons did not merely serve kings, they carved out their own vast territories in Ireland, becoming some of the most formidable magnates of the later medieval period. Yet her influence flowed just as strongly through her other marriages. With Stephen, the Norman constable of Cardigan, she had sons who founded another branch of this sprawling family tree, their roots gripping deep into Welsh soil. And her daughters, bearing that precious royal Welsh blood, were married off with strategic precision, binding Norman lords to Welsh princes in a web of kinship that was both a source of conflict and a fragile framework for peace. Nest became the mother of dynasties, a single genealogical root from which multiple powerful houses grew. Her descendants included Welsh rulers who fought for independence and Anglo-Norman barons who enforced English rule, a living contradiction that shaped the region for centuries. This was a queen's enduring power, not written in law books or carved on battle monuments, but inscribed in the very bloodlines of the ruling class. She shaped the political landscape not with a sword, but through the cradle, her legacy a network of alliances that long outlived her. How many other women, whose names we have forgotten, wielded this same quiet, monumental influence? Deep in the valleys of southern Wales, the kingdom of Morgannwg offers a different kind of story, one written not in epic poetry but in the daily rhythms of a royal court. Here, power was not always about leading armies, but about running the machine that made those armies possible. At the heart of this world was the Welsh Ellis, a complex of wooden halls and workshops, the administrative and social center of the kingdom. And at the center of the Ellis was the Queen, or the Lady of the Castle, the chief executive of a bustling, self-sufficient community. Her authority was absolute within the domestic sphere, a sphere that was, in reality, the entire economic engine of the realm. She did not merely supervise, she governed. Her first and most critical responsibility was the management of the household itself, a small city in microcosm. This meant overseeing the vast stores of food from grain to smoked meat, ensuring there was enough to feed the royal family, the warriors, the craftsmen, and the constant stream of guests. A poorly managed Ellis was a weak Ellis, and a weak Ellis could not command respect or loyalty. Her influence then radiated outward from the Great Hall. She was the chief administrator of the royal estates, the scattered lands that provided the kingdom's wealth. While the king was away at war or at treaty negotiations, it was the queen who received reports from stewards, who directed the planting and harvesting of crops, and who managed the vital herds of cattle that were the primary measure of Celtic wealth. This was not a quiet, secluded life. It was a constant, demanding performance of logistics and command. Archaeological excavations at sites like Dynfor, a later Welsh court, reveal the physical footprint of this authority. We find the foundations of the Great Hall for feasting, but also the specialized workshops for metalworkers and jewelers she would have overseen. We find evidence of large-scale food processing, from quern stones for grinding grain to pits for storing salted provisions. These are the silent ruins of her domain. Perhaps her most fascinating role, however, was as a patron of the arts. The Welsh bardic tradition was not mere entertainment, it was the propaganda machine and the historical record of the age. The Queen was often the direct patron of the court poet, the pensard. She provided him with shelter, food, and silver, and in return he crafted elegant poems that celebrated her generosity, her wisdom, and the legitimacy of her husband's rule. A well-praised queen in song was a political asset, her virtue and capability broadcast throughout the land. This grounded, daily authority reveals the true breadth of a Celtic queen's power. She was the steward of the kingdom's wealth, the manager of its people, and the curator of its legacy. While kings won battles, queens built the foundations that made those victories possible, ruling a world that was every bit as complex and vital as the battlefield. But the legal fortress of Welsh queenship could not hold forever against a changing world. Across the border in England, a very different story was being written, one where the memory of a powerful Celtic queen was slowly transformed into a tragic legend. We see this most clearly in the tale of Queen Cordelia. Her story begins not in a history book, but in the inventive pages of Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain, a 12th century chronicle that mixed myth, legend, and a little pure invention to create a grand national past. In Geoffrey's account, Cordelia is the youngest and most virtuous daughter of the ancient King Lear of Britain. When the aging king demands his daughters proclaim their love for him, her two elder sisters offer lavish false flattery. Cordelia, however, speaks with blunt honesty, declaring she loves him as a daughter should. Enraged, Lear disinherits her. This is the classic setup of a folktale, but what happens next is remarkable. Cordelia does not fade away. She marries the King of Gaul, and when her father is betrayed and overthrown by her wicked sisters, she returns at the head of an army, restores him to his throne, and after his death, she herself rules Britain peacefully for 5 years. Here, in this legendary frame, we have the clear echo of a Celtic queen, a sovereign ruler who leads armies and governs wisely in her own right. Geoffrey of Monmouth was writing in a world still shadowed by the Norman conquest, collecting Welsh and Breton legends. His Cordelia, the warrior queen who saves and then succeeds her father, feels like a distant literary memory of the kind of female authority that was being systematically erased from contemporary records. Centuries later, William Shakespeare would take this story and reshape it for his own tragic purposes in King Lear. In his hands, Cordelia's fate is drastically altered. Her honesty remains, but her power is stripped away. She is no longer a queen who returns with an army to reclaim her birthright and rule. Instead, she is a tragic victim, a figure of pure goodness who is captured and dies, her political and military agency utterly erased. Shakespeare's play ends not with a queen on the throne, but with a world plunged into chaos and grief. This dramatic shift from a ruling sovereign to a helpless martyr reveals the profound change in how society viewed women in power between the Celtic world Geoffrey was echoing and the Renaissance England of Shakespeare's stage. The endurance of Cordelia's name, even in its tragic form, speaks to a deep cultural memory. She is a ghost of a forgotten reality, a literary fossil preserving the imprint of a time when a woman ruling Britain was not an absurdity, but a part of the national story. Her legend asks us a haunting question. Why did a story about a competent ruling queen have to be rewritten into a tragedy about a daughter's futile sacrifice? The answer lies in the slow, centuries-long closing of the political world to women, a process that transformed powerful historical figures into silent legends or tragic martyrs, their real authority fading into a mist of myth. Yet even the great fortress of Arthurian legend has a queen hidden in its foundations. Before the sword in the stone, before the round table, there was a woman named Igraine, the Duchess of Cornwall. Her story is the secret key to the entire myth, a tale that perfectly encapsulates the ancient Celtic link between a woman and the sovereignty of the land itself. In the version immortalized by writers like Geoffrey of Monmouth, Igraine is the wife of Gormlaith, the Duke of Cornwall. When King Uther Pendragon sees her, he is consumed with a desire so powerful it threatens to destabilize the kingdom. Gormlaith, sensing the danger, hides Igraine in his impenetrable castle of Tintagel, but Uther will not be denied. He enlists the wizard Merlin, who uses his magic to disguise the king, giving him the exact appearance of Gormlaith. Under this enchantment, Uther gains entry to Tintagel and to Igraine's chamber. From that union, Arthur is conceived. On the surface, this seems like a straightforward story of magical deception. But if we listen closely, we can hear the echoes of a much older, more profound belief system. In the deep Celtic past, the right to rule was not just taken by force, it was conferred through a sacred marriage. A king did not simply conquer a territory, he had to symbolically marry the goddess of the land, who was often represented by the queen. Her acceptance of him was what legitimized his reign and ensured the kingdom's fertility and prosperity. Igraine is not just a beautiful duchess, she is the human embodiment of the land of Cornwall. By uniting with her, other Pendragon is not merely sating a personal lust, he is performing a ritual act that secures his royal authority and paves the way for the birth of a mythic hero. The magic of Merlin's disguise is not just a plot device, it is a remnant of this ancient sovereignty ritual, where the king must take on a sacred form to be worthy of the land queen. This transforms Igraine from a passive victim of trickery into the active, though unknowing, conduit of sovereignty. Her body is the threshold through which the destiny of Britain passes. This is why her story is so foundational. Arthur, the once and future king, can only be born from this specific, magically charged union between a king and a queen who represents the land itself. The legend preserves, in a distorted folkloric form, the immense symbolic power that was once vested in Celtic royal women. They were not just political actors, they were the living, breathing symbols of the kingdom's very soul, and no king could truly rule without their connection. The same struggle for sovereignty echoed across the water in the rocky peninsula of Brittany. Here, the Celtic world clung to the continent, its language and laws a defiant mirror of Cornwall and Wales. In this precarious duchy caught between the rising powers of France and England, a different kind of queen emerged, the duchess who ruled in her own name. Constance of Brittany was one such woman, a sovereign whose entire life became a desperate battle to hold the line. She was not a queen consort, she was the Duchess of Brittany, a title she inherited directly, and her authority made her a prize and a threat in equal measure. Her court was a vortex of competing ambitions, where the kings of England and France saw her not as a ruler, but as a vessel for their own expansion. They schemed to control her, to marry her to their own vassals, and through her to absorb her homeland. Constance's reign was a masterclass in political survival against impossible odds. She was married first to Geoffrey Plantagenet, a son of the English king, a union meant to bind Brittany to the English crown. When Geoffrey died unexpectedly, the English king, Henry II, immediately seized her duchy and her infant son, Arthur, holding them both as political hostages. Constance was imprisoned in his court, her authority stripped away, but she was not broken. Upon Henry's death, she engineered her escape and returned to Brittany in a triumphant procession, reclaiming her throne and her son. She spent the rest of her life maneuvering through a deadly labyrinth. She was forced into a second marriage with a minor English nobleman, a man she openly despised, and the union became so volatile she eventually had him imprisoned. Her final marriage was to a French nobleman, a strategic move to counterbalance English pressure. Every decision was calculated to preserve one thing above all else: Breton independence and the right of her son, Arthur, to inherit what was rightfully his. She navigated this world of titans not with armies, but with treaties, marriages, and sheer, unyielding will. Can you picture the immense pressure she faced every single day? The constant letters, the veiled threats, the knowledge that one misstep could mean the end of her nation's distinct identity. She was the living bulwark, the human shield for her people's way of life. Her tragic end came not in battle, but in childbirth, a grim reminder of how a queen's body was both her source of power and her greatest vulnerability. Her son Arthur's subsequent fate, murdered by his own uncle, King John of England, is one of history's great tragedies, but it should not overshadow Constance's own fierce, two-decade-long fight. She held the line long enough for the idea of Brittany to endure, a testament to the quiet, stubborn power of a Celtic duchess who refused to be erased. Constance's court was a fortress under siege, a place of whispered alliances and sudden betrayals. Her third marriage to Guy of Thouars was another strategic move in her endless struggle to preserve Breton autonomy against the voracious appetites of England and France. But before that final alliance, she endured a marriage that became her personal prison. Her second husband, Ranulph de Blondeville, was an English earl imposed upon her by King Richard the Lionheart. This was not a union of hearts or even of mutual interest. It was a blatant attempt to keep Brittany under English thumb through a loyal proxy. Ranulph did not see Constance as a fellow ruler, he saw her as his subject. The tension between them grew so toxic that it erupted into open conflict. In a stunning reversal of power, Constance herself was captured and imprisoned by her own husband. For years, she was held in one of his English castles, a sovereign duchess locked away by the man who was supposed to be her consort. Her duchy was governed in her absence, her people leaderless, her authority mocked. Yet even from confinement, she fought, she negotiated, she rallied supporters, and she never relinquished her claim. Her eventual release was a testament to her indomitable will and the political pressure her allies could bring to bear. It was a stark lesson in the unique vulnerability of a ruling queen, whose very person could become a battlefield. Amid this relentless political turmoil, Constance cultivated a different kind of power, the power of culture. She understood that a nation's identity is forged not only in treaties but in stories. Her court became a vibrant center for Breton literature, a deliberate act of cultural defiance. She patronized poets and scribes who chronicled the heroic legends of Brittany, works like the Roman de Brut, which traced Breton history back to the fall of Troy. By commissioning and protecting these texts, she was building a bulwark against cultural absorption. She was ensuring that the Breton language, its myths, and its unique history would not be forgotten, that her people would remember they were a nation, not a province. This was statecraft of the most profound kind, an investment in the soul of her people. What does it mean to rule when your every breath is a negotiation for survival? Constance's entire life was the answer. She died in 1201, not on a battlefield but in the pain of childbirth, her body finally succumbing to the pressures her spirit had resisted for so long. Her legacy is a complex tapestry of defiance and tragedy. She secured the succession for her daughter, Alex, and ensured the ducal line continued, but her dream of a fully independent Brittany ultimately faded under the shadow of France. Yet, centuries later, she remains a potent symbol. In modern Brittany, Constance is remembered not as a failure, but as a resilient icon of resistance, the duchess who held the line against giants for as long as one human life possibly could. Her story echoes a chilling truth for the forgotten queens, that the crown could be both a seat of power and a cage, and that their greatest battles were often fought not against foreign armies, but within the walls of their own homes. North of the Scottish mainland, the sea itself was a kingdom. Amid the windswept isles and sea locks of the Hebrides, a unique power emerged, so autonomous it was known simply as the Lordship of the Isles. Ruled by chiefs from the MacDonald and MacDougall clans, this was a maritime empire built on galleys and trade routes, a realm that answered more to its own ancient laws than to any distant Scottish king. And while the Lord commanded the fleets, the Lady of the Isles held a power that was just as vital, anchoring his authority to the land and its people. These women were often high-born daughters of Irish Gaelic kings, and their marriages were more than political unions. They were the cables that tied the lordship to the powerful dynasties of Ireland, creating a cultural and military alliance that spanned the sea. This connection made the lady a key diplomat, a bridge between two Gaelic worlds. Her court would have been filled with the sounds of both Scottish and Irish Gaelic, and her influence ensured that the lordship remained a bastion of a shared Celtic identity. But her authority was not merely symbolic. While the lord was away on campaign or overseeing distant islands, the lady managed the vast day-to-day affairs of the domain. She was the chief administrator of a scattered island nation, overseeing the collection of rents paid in kind, barley, cattle, and the precious silver from trade. She ensured the fortresses were provisioned and the bards were paid, maintaining the intricate web of loyalties that held the lordship together. This was a logistical challenge of immense scale, governing a realm where communication depended on the weather and the speed of a galley's oars. Her patronage was the lifeblood of a unique hybrid culture. In the Great Hall at Finlaggan on Islay, the administrative heart of the lordship, she would have supported the poets, musicians, and scholars who crafted the lord's reputation. This was not simple entertainment, it was statecraft. The songs composed under her patronage celebrated a distinct Gaelic Norse identity, weaving together Celtic myth with the seafaring legacy of the Vikings. By funding the creation of elaborate manuscripts and supporting the professional bardic schools, the ladies of the Isles helped cultivate a cultural confidence that allowed the lordship to flourish as a near-independent state for centuries. They understood that true power was not just held by the sword, but by the pen and the harp, the tools that shape a people's memory and identity. Hidden within the ancient verses of Celtic poetry, a queen's power was not just described, it was prophesied. The Welsh poem known as Arms Did Broad, or the Prophecy of Judgment Day, does not just speak of divine wrath. It features a powerful female figure who embodies the land of Wales itself, rising in fury and renewal. This was not a solitary image. Across the native literature from Ireland to Scotland, we find a recurring, potent archetype, the sovereignty goddess. She was the spiritual embodiment of the kingdom, a divine female figure who alone could confer the right to rule upon a mortal man. In the foundational Irish myths, a prospective king would have to symbolically marry this goddess, often appearing as a hideous hag. If he accepted her, she would transform into a beautiful maiden, and the land would flourish under his reign. This was not a simple fairy tale. It was a deep-seated cultural code that linked a woman's approval directly to a king's legitimacy and the nation's prosperity. The goddess was the land, and the land was a woman. This mythological framework created a powerful echo for real historical queens. A queen sitting on a throne was not just a political partner, she was the living, human representative of that sovereignty goddess. Her presence beside the king was a constant, visible reminder of the sacred contract that legitimized his rule. Her fertility mirrored the fertility of the earth. Her wisdom echoed the wisdom of the land. When a poet composed a piece for a queen, praising her beauty and generosity, he was doing more than flattering a patron. He was performing a ritual, reinforcing her role as the human vessel of the kingdom's soul. This is why the portrayal of queens in these texts is so monumental and symbolic. They are rarely shown in the mundane acts of daily governance. Instead, they are depicted as pillars of the world, their actions tied to the fate of the nation. A queen's generosity could ensure a good harvest, her anger could curse a dynasty. This poetic tradition gave queens a form of soft power that was immense and culturally sanctioned. It meant that even in times when their direct political or military authority was being challenged by new patriarchal systems, their symbolic importance remained, a ghost of the old ways haunting the new order. The poetry and the prophecy kept the idea of female sovereignty alive, long after the laws that supported it had been rewritten. A queen's authority was not just written in law or sung in poetry, it was built in stone. Across the Celtic world, the landscape itself holds the physical proof of her power. Take the Broch of Gurnus in Orkney, a massive, complex fortress of stone towers and intimate dwellings. Within its walls, archaeologists found something remarkable, a distinct, high-status dwelling separate from the main Broch Tower. This space contained fine, imported Roman glass and ornate jewelry, suggesting it was the domain of a powerful woman, the Lady of the Broch. This was not a secluded chamber, but a command center, a place from which she could oversee the community's daily life and its far-reaching trade networks. Her wealth, displayed in objects from across the sea, spoke of connections and influence that stretched far beyond her island home. In the great royal forts of Ireland, like the iconic Rock of Cashel, we see a similar story carved into the earth. These were not just military strongholds, they were bustling centers of administration, craft, and ceremony. The archaeology of these sites often reveals specialized workshops for producing high-status goods like fine metalwork and intricate textiles. Finds of decorated spindle whorls, the weights used for spinning thread, are particularly telling. In a world where cloth was a primary measure of wealth, control over its production was a form of economic power. A queen presiding over such a fortress was not just a symbol, she was the chief executive of a complex economic engine, her status woven into the very fabric of her realm. What do these spaces tell us about her daily life? The so-called queen's quarters in these structures were often strategically located, offering both privacy and a commanding view of the main courtyard or hall. This was a deliberate architectural choice, placing her at the heart of the action yet elevating her above it. From here, she could receive guests, manage the household's vast resources, and direct the activities of countless artisans and servants. The artifacts left behind, a delicate blue glass bead from the Mediterranean, a finely carved bone comb, a brooch cast in local gold, they are not merely personal trinkets. They are the material remnants of her network, her taste, and her public role. Each imported object is a whisper of a diplomatic gift or a trade agreement she helped broker. Each piece of local finery is a statement of her power to command the best craftspeople in the land. These feminine spaces were far from passive. They were hubs of industry and influence. The presence of high-quality weaving tools suggests she oversaw the production of the luxury textiles that were essential for gift-giving and reinforcing social bonds. The evidence of feasting, from large cauldrons to animal bones, points to her role as a hostess, a patron whose generosity could bind warriors to her family's cause. When you walk through the ruins of a place like Dunat in Scotland, another royal power centre, you can almost feel the echo of that busy, purposeful life. The stone is cold and silent now, but it once thrummed with the energy of a court where the Queen's authority was as tangible as the rock beneath her feet. Her fortress was more than a defense, it was the physical manifestation of her rule, a kingdom in miniature built around the undeniable fact of her presence. The Norman conquest of England was not the end of a story, but the violent beginning of a new legal reality. This seismic event sent shockwaves far beyond the English Channel, crashing into the Celtic world with the force of a cultural tsunami. The Normans brought with them a weapon more effective than any sword, a rigidly patriarchal system of land ownership and law known as feudalism. In this new order, power was a pyramid. At the top sat the king, who granted land to his loyal male barons, who in turn granted smaller parcels to their knights. Every layer of this pyramid was held by a man who swore an oath of military service to the man above him. There was simply no designated space for a woman who owned land in her own right and commanded her own warriors. The ancient Celtic model, where a queen could be a sovereign ruler, was not just outdated, it was politically subversive. It had to be dismantled. This was not an accidental shift, it was a systematic campaign. In Wales, the intricate laws of wielded, which had protected a woman's right to property and divorce, were deliberately targeted. Norman marcher lords and later English kings viewed these native codes as backward and barbaric. They actively suppressed them, imposing English common law in their place. Under this new legal regime, the doctrine of coverture took hold. A married woman's legal identity was entirely consumed by her husband's. She could not own property, sign a contract, or sue in court. Her land became his land. Her voice in the eyes of the law fell silent. The independent Welsh Rhian or Irish Rigain was legally transformed into a dependent wife. The erasure extended from the courtroom to the chronicle. The monks and scribes who wrote the official histories were now often working under the patronage of Norman lords or in monasteries that answered to a new foreign hierarchy. Their task was to record a past that legitimized the present order. In this revised history, a queen leading an army was not a fact, it was an anomaly. It was a transgression against the natural order, so the chroniclers minimized them. They recast powerful rulers like Cartimandua as treacherous, or simply wrote them out of the narrative altogether, reducing them to footnotes in the stories of their husbands or fathers. The vibrant, complex reality of Celtic queenship was flattened into a simple, patriarchal fable. This was a war of attrition fought with parchment and ink, and it was devastatingly effective. The very framework that had supported female authority for centuries was methodically broken down and replaced. The forgotten queens did not fade away by chance. They were actively, systematically silenced by a new world order that had no room for their kind of power. The silence of the past is finally being broken. A quiet revolution is underway in university laboratories and dusty archive rooms, where a new generation of detectives is using cutting-edge tools to challenge centuries of historical neglect. These historians, archaeologists, and geneticists are not just reading the old stories, they are asking new questions of the evidence, and the answers are resurrecting the forgotten queens. Take the enigmatic Cartimandua. For generations, she was defined solely by the scorn of Roman historians. But modern scholars are now re-evaluating her long reign, asking a simple but profound question. What did her people gain from her pragmatic alliance with Rome? The answer appears to be decades of relative peace and prosperity, a stability that allowed her tribe, the Brigantes, to flourish while others were crushed under the Roman boot. This is not an apology for collaboration, but a recognition of her skilled statecraft, a complexity lost in the older, simpler narratives of good versus evil. The ground itself is yielding its secrets. In Wales, the analysis of the Dangors Crannog, an ancient artificial island on a lake, has revealed it was a high-status royal site from the age of the Welsh kings. While its specific royal occupant remains nameless, the quality of the artifacts, including a piece of silk from Byzantium, speaks of a court with far-reaching connections, a court that would have been managed by a powerful queen. This physical evidence gives weight to the laws of wielded, proving that the sophisticated legal rights of Welsh women were not just theoretical, but were lived realities in places of wealth and power. Perhaps the most dramatic breakthroughs are coming from the science of genetics. Stable isotope analysis, which reads the chemical signatures in ancient bones and teeth, can now tell us where a person grew up and what they ate. Imagine applying this to a mysterious high-status female burial. If her isotopic signature shows she was not local, but was raised hundreds of miles away, it transforms her from a vague name into a tangible person, a living symbol of a strategic alliance between kingdoms, a queen who traveled far from her home to secure a peace. This technology is turning skeletal remains into biographical narratives. Old texts are being read with fresh eyes. Scholars are now meticulously tracing the patronage behind medieval manuscripts, asking who paid for a particular book to be written. In several cases, they have found the subtle but clear influence of a queen or a powerful noblewoman, her taste and her political agenda shaping the stories that were preserved. A chronicle that once seemed like an objective record is now understood as a document funded by a specific family, often to bolster the legitimacy of a female heir. This is detective work on a microscopic level, finding the fingerprints of female power in the marginalia of history. The search for these women has even entered the digital realm, with databases and text mining software allowing researchers to analyze thousands of documents at once, spotting patterns and connections that a single scholar reading for a lifetime might never see. The story of the Celtic queens is no longer a closed book. It is a living, breathing field of study where every excavation, every genetic sequence, and every new reading of a faded line of poetry has the potential to rewrite what we thought we knew. The puzzle is immense, and we are only just beginning to fit the pieces together. A single line in an Irish chronicle mentions a queen named Gormlaith of the Breuin who died in the year 980. That is all we have: her name, a date, and a flicker of a title. The rest is silence, but that silence is not empty, it is a challenge. How do we unmask a queen from 1,000 years ago? Let us become detectives and build a plausible life for her from the fragments she left behind. Our first clue is her name, Gormlaith. It was a name borne by powerful women, meaning blue princess or sovereign, a name that carried the weight of expectation. She belonged to the Briuin, a dominant dynasty in Connacht. This simple fact tells us she was born into a world of warring chieftains and intricate alliances, where her very existence was a political asset. Next, we turn to the law. We know from surviving Irish law tracts that a woman of her rank, a Rigain, held significant legal rights. She could inherit property, initiate divorce, and her honor price was high, meaning an insult to her required a hefty payment directly to her. This legal framework gives her a shape, an outline of the authority she would have legally commanded. Now we look to the land itself. Archaeology provides the physical stage for her life. The royal site of Carnfreach in County Roscommon was a power centre for the Briuin. Excavations there reveal the foundations of a large ceremonial enclosure, evidence of fine metalworking, and the bones of countless cattle, the primary currency of the age. This was not a rustic fort, it was a bustling centre of administration and trade. Our hypothetical Queen Gormlaith would have presided here, managing the vast herds, receiving tribute, and overseeing the craftspeople who produced the brooches and weaponry that displayed her family's status. A single archaeological find can illuminate her world. A beautiful silver penannular brooch discovered in a hoard not far from Carnfreach is of a style worn by high-status women. It is not too great a leap to imagine it adorning Gormlaith's shoulder, a public declaration of her wealth and rank. But how did she wield her power? For this, we use comparative evidence. We look at the better documented life of the other, later Gormlaith. That queen used marriage as her primary tool of statecraft, weaving alliances between rival kingdoms. It is plausible, almost inevitable, that our Gormlaith did the same. Perhaps she was married to a king from Munster to secure a southern alliance, or to a northern rival to end a bloody feud. Her life would have been a series of calculated moves, balancing the pride of her birth family with the demands of her husband's court. A chronicle from a neighboring region mentions a great battle in 975, a conflict that reshaped the regional balance of power. While our Gormlaith is not named, the battle occurred within her lifetime and sphere of influence. Could she have provided the warriors from her own land? Could her diplomatic efforts have secured a crucial ally, tipping the scales? This is the thrill of the reconstruction, connecting the dots between a silent name and the loud events that surrounded her. Finally, we consider her death in 980. The chronicle gives no cause, but the patterns of the time suggest violence, illness, or the perils of childbirth. Her legacy would have been her children, their royal blood, a mixture of lineages, and the stability or instability she helped forge during her reign. The story we have built is a hypothesis, a tapestry woven from legal threads, archaeological scraps, and the patterns of other lives. It may not be precisely true in every detail, but it is profoundly truthful. It rescues a shadow from the void and gives us back a woman of law, of land, and of immense quiet influence. She is no longer just a name in a list. She is a ruler restored to her rightful place in the tapestry of history. Their stories form a breathtaking tapestry of power, each thread a different shade of sovereignty. We have met the pragmatic Cartimandua, who chose collaboration to preserve her kingdom, and the tragic Gormlaith, whose personal alliances ignited a national war. We have witnessed the defiant Constance of Brittany, who spent her life as a human bulwark against empires. From the warrior fury of Boudica to the legal authority of a Welsh Riain and the sacred symbolism of a Pictish princess, these women were not a single archetype. They were rulers, diplomats, mothers of dynasties, and chief executives of entire economies. Their lives answer one mystery, revealing the profound and varied authority women could hold while simultaneously deepening another. The great puzzle is not just who they were, but why they were so systematically forgotten. their legacies buried under layers of patriarchal law and rewritten chronicles. This erasure was not an accident of time, it was a deliberate dismantling of a world that allowed for their existence. So the next time you find yourself walking the rugged coast of Wales, or the windswept hills of Scotland, or standing near the Rock of Cashel in Ireland, pause for a moment. Listen to the wind and the silence. Beneath your feet lies the ghost of a different history, one where formidable queens once made laws, led armies, and shaped the destiny of nations. Their stories have been whispers for 1,000 years, but we are finally learning how to hear them again. And that makes you wonder what other voices are still waiting in the silence, patiently hoping for someone to listen.